All right, Rob and Lindsey, take it away.
All right, I'm happy to start. First of all, Kinsey, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right, there we go. Thank you for living in the neighborhood and stepping up and being a support in our office and being willing to be basically the host of this conversation. And we really appreciate that. Thanks to everybody for taking the time to sign up and show up tonight as we do this spring session 2023 wrap up. Just a few things to set the table. First of all, I think and I hope that everyone here knows a little bit about their state representative and state senator, but just very briefly, because it's an easy way to talk about myself, I am a social worker turned policy advocate turned state representative, and I've been in this role of state rep for almost 4 years. And the state house district that I represent, which is half of Senator Martwick's Senate district, covers 108,000 people, and it covers Jefferson Park, Portage Park, Dunning, Gladstone Park, Old Irving, parts of Independence Park. And we just lived through a remap for both ward lines and state legislative lines. So some of you probably had a different state representative officially up until mid-September. In terms of the legislative session, just want to touch on where we are, because a lot of folks think that Rob and I live in Springfield. We get that question every once in a while, and we don't. We live here in the neighborhoods that we represent. I live in Portage Park. Rob lives in Portage Park. And we just had our first in-person legislative session for the first time in terms of being in person from late January till the end of May since 2019. We all lived through some really difficult times. And when we're in our regular legislative session, Rob and I are in Springfield 3 or 4 days a week, like Tuesday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday from January all the way through the end of May. So we're about to talk about what the heck we just did in that legislative session, including passing a state budget. And just one other note I want to make before I turn it over to my good friend and Senator Rob is we've lived through a weird and difficult last few years, but also in terms of the state General Assembly, we have relatively new leaders in the House and the Senate. In the House, we have Speaker of the House, Emanuel Chris Welch, who is from the Broadview, Westchester area, and he became Speaker in early January 2021. And in the Senate, we have President Don Harmon from Oak Park. And they came after some folks that had been in office, been leaders for a really long time. So I just share that so you know that we've actually had a lot of turnover in the Illinois General Assembly. We have a lot of new faces. I've only been in 4 years, and already I am ranked number 75 out of 118 House reps. And we range in age from age 23 all the way up to senior citizen. So that's a little bit about the House and where we are. And I'll hand it over to Rob before we get rolling with the slides.
Thanks, Lindsey, and Kinsey, thanks for moderating. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name, as Lindsey said, is Rob Martwick, and for the last 4 years, as long as she has been a state representative, maybe 1 month longer, I think it is, I've been a state senator. Before that, I had the privilege of serving as the state representative of the 19th district for the position Lindsey now holds for 7 years. So I've been in the General Assembly for 11 years. For those of you who don't know me, I live kind of on the border of Jefferson Park, Portage Park, over near Montrose and Central, with my wife and 2 young children, both CPS students. And it's been a really singular privilege to serve in the Illinois General Assembly over the last 11 years. Most of the work that I've done over the course of the last 11 years has been about the middle class. It has been strong consumer protections for the middle class to make sure that we're not being gouged by people who would take advantage of us because we are hard workers and don't have time to read fine print. I've passed a lot of laws. One of them this year, I think, is going to be very helpful to that. I've been a champion of public education. I passed the bill that created an elected representative school board for the Chicago Public Schools, which will be implemented at beginning in 2024, and we're still working out details on that. And I've been a strong advocate for public safety and fiscal responsibility, securing pensions, making sure we're solving our pension problems. The great thing about the Illinois General Assembly is that you bring your world experience in there. And since I moved to the Senate and Lindsey came into the House, I'm a tax lawyer by trade. Having Lindsey as a social worker, I learned so much from her about issues that were not normally in my world, but we have to vote on everything. So it's an incredible learning process, and being able to learn from her and work on issues, very important issues that we'll talk about around surrounding mental health and social services has really helped me be better at the job that I do. Again, it's been a real pleasure. We had a very productive year since Governor Pritzker has taken the helm in the governor's mansion. We've actually had a series of now 5 very productive legislative sessions, and we've made Illinois a real bright spot in the Midwest for advancing good legislation to help protect people, women's access to reproductive health care, public education, workers' rights, and we're continuing on with our work in that. And so we've got good news to share with you today. And with that, I'm going to thank you again all for joining, and thank you for the privilege of serving you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kinsey to start asking questions.
We're going to start with that presentation from Lindsey. Let me know if everyone can see it on my screen. Is it showing up? Okay, perfect. So.
Can you roll to slide 2, Kinsey? All right. So we passed more than 560 bills in our legislative session this spring that wrapped up May 27th. And we're going to walk through some, but by no means anywhere near all of some of those bills. So first, let's talk about healthcare, mental health care, and reproductive rights. And there's a reason why all of these bills are going to come on 2 slides. I see these things as all connected. Healthcare is a human right. Mental health care is healthcare. Access to reproductive health care is also healthcare. I'm sure not everyone agrees, but that is my lens and my approach. So we did some important things related to expanding access to healthcare. First one on here is a bill that capped monthly insulin prices for state regulated plans. So that's not everybody's healthcare plan, unfortunately. But this bill capped the monthly insulin price at $35 a month. Some of you, if you're super engaged, might remember that previously our neighbor to the east, Representative Will Guzzardi, led a bill to cap monthly insulin price at $100 a month. So we are bringing it down to 35. And the point here is that diabetes is something that many of us have to live with. And our neighbors with diabetes desperately need access to this medication to survive. And it's really breaking household budgets. And we're at a particular time where cost of living is up and many of our families feel choked. This bill won't go into effect until 2025. Most bills don't come into effect right away, but this is one to watch out for that we are very proud of. The next one here is a further investment into our healthcare benefits for immigrant adults program. And you might have seen a little bit about this in the news really recently. We have, just a level set, you've heard the word Medicaid before, of course. Some of you are probably living with it. Medicaid is our health insurance program for people in the United States, in Illinois, under a certain income threshold. It's funded both state and federally. And starting in 2020, Illinois was one of the first states to expand a Medicaid-like, not exactly Medicaid, but a Medicaid-like program for people over a certain age who are undocumented. And we started with people 65 and older, and we are continuing to move forward with that program. We've pulled the age eligibility down to age 42. Again, this is only for people under a certain income level. And we made a further investment into that program. What you might have seen in the news recently is that the Pritzker administration, just as of 3 days ago, put some caps on this program because we have to control costs. We have a $50 billion state budget. And as we're going to talk about, there's a lot of pressures. So there's going to be a cap on enrollment. There's going to be some copays instituted, but that's another thing related to healthcare access that we did. Next, we do this every year. We passed a Medicaid omnibus package, and I just explained what Medicaid is, and we have a whole bunch of rates for Medicaid, and these are rates that we in the state legislature set. So what is the rate going to be that hospitals who take a Medicaid population can get for psychiatric inpatient, or what can our drug treatment providers get when they provide inpatient treatment for people on Medicaid? Across the board, our Medicaid reimbursement rates are far lower than commercial insurance reimbursement rates, and they do not cover the cost of care, which is one of the reasons, and this is a big issue for me, our healthcare and behavioral healthcare providers, which at the end of the day are people. Some of you might work in that field. If you work at a place that takes predominantly Medicaid, you make a lot less money. And that's something front of mind for me when it comes to our social workers and counselors and drug treatment providers, because I value that work so much. So this Medicaid package, we worked hard to increase those rates. Our hospitals got a 10% Medicaid reimbursement rate increase, the first one in more than 20 years. And the last one on the slide here is a bill that I was proud to lead in my capacity as chair of the Mental Health and Addiction Committee in the House. We are the third state to pass a bill where state regulated insurance plans will have to cover one no cost, no diagnosis mental health and wellness visit per year. And the idea there is, think about annual physicals that is in the public consciousness. For those of us who have health insurance, we know what an annual physical is. It is just in our regular order of doing things. And so the idea with this bill is we should be working access to mental health into our regular day-to-day. And so we put it into law for state regulated insurance plans that they would have to cover one annual no cost and no diagnosis mental health and wellness visit per year. I think we have a few more on the next slide related to this category. All right, I'll speed it up a little bit. This top one here is a bill I was proud to lead, which further expands our 988 crisis response system. And hopefully many of you have heard of 988 for a non-law enforcement place to call, somebody to come, and a place to go for people that are experiencing a mental health crisis. And we have a 988 suicide crisis response line now everywhere across the country. States were forced to move forward and implement this as of July 2022. So it's been in place for almost a year. But what we don't yet have in Illinois, and certainly not in every corner of Illinois, is an integrated system where if somebody is in a mental health crisis and they're not at risk of hurting themselves or others, because if they are, 911 and is the place to call, then there is a crisis worker who will literally come to them, and there is a place to go, like something we call the living room model of mental health treatment, a place to, what's the word here, de-escalate and come out of crisis, and then a place to get connected to treatment. And when this is all said and done, we want an integrated system, and we want all of this in the public consciousness, so people like you and me and all of our neighbors know that there are other options besides 911. So we're going to continue to build out that system, but this bill was to further implement and fund the system. Next, moving into reproductive health care, many of us know that since Roe v. Wade was overturned, there's a lot of anxiety out there. There's a lot of difficulty accessing basic reproductive health care contingent on what state you're in. Illinois continues to be a beacon of hope. We say that a lot because it's true when it comes to being able to access the suite of reproductive health care. So the next 4 bills here are what we focused on this spring, really in a response to an evolving situation around the country and in our surrounding states. So a few things here. Public college campuses will have at least 1 vending machine with access to a certain kind of contraceptives that is colloquially known as Plan B. We passed a bill to safeguard access to mifepristone in Illinois, and that is a more precise way of talking about medication-assisted abortions. And the majority of abortions in this country, if they are done early along enough in the process, are actually provided by medication. And you've seen that other states are severely limiting access to that medication. So we put safeguards in place. We passed a bill to put a prohibition on sharing automatic license plate reader data if the point is to enforce anti-choice laws in other states. We have a whole lot of data now because technology is really increasing. We use automatic license plate reader data for various things. And so it was important to be clear that we're not going to use it to enforce anti-choice laws for other states. And then finally, we passed a law to prohibit crisis pregnancy centers from utilizing deceptive practices. And we heard from a variety of witnesses. We looked at a lot of data showing that there are crisis pregnancy centers who use deceptive practices, such as obscuring information about how far along somebody is in a pregnancy with the goal to get that option of abortion off the table. So we put this into law, which gives the Attorney General power to hold crisis pregnancy centers accountable for engaging in deceptive practices.
I am going to move everybody that we do have to end by 7:30, so just making sure that we have that time at the end for questions.
All right, I'm going to speed it up here a little bit, and then the senator is going to take some slides. Public safety, no doubt, public safety and gun violence in particular continues to be one of the biggest issues facing the state, and certainly one of the biggest issues facing the city of Chicago. And in recent years, we have made some big investments in violence prevention, increased dollars to our community-based organizations that are on the ground doing the work with some of our young people and adults who are most at risk of being a victim or being a perpetrator of violent crime. Some of you have visited some of those organizations with us. That money continues to flow. The goal is to fund these organizations at the scale of the problem. We did some other things related to public safety this spring. We passed a bill to hold the gun industry liable for dangerous sales and marketing tactics, because there are some that are engaging in marketing practices targeted at young people. We needed a tool in statute to hold the industry liable for doing that. We did a few things that were very specific to support our first responders. We need our first responders to be as healthy and as effective as they can be, because that's a really important component of our public safety system. So one very specific problem to COVID that we had on the books is for our Chicago police officers in particular that had contracted COVID at a certain period of time before vaccines were available. We needed to put a rebuttable presumption into law that they contracted COVID while on the job, which importantly would allow them to access duty disability benefits. You might have seen in the news that our comptroller, Susanna Mendoza, Portage Park resident, her brother went through this exactly, and she was a champion of this bill, and we're very proud that it passed quickly, bipartisan, and the governor signed it. First responder mental health. Talk about supporting first responders, making sure they're healthy so they can be effective. There's a lot that the city can and should be doing related to this, but there's a state investment that we can make. And we've done a few things over the years. This year, we appropriated $10 million to fund behavioral health support for first responder wellness programs in the city of Chicago, and an additional $10 million for the state. And the beauty of this is we, in statute, defined first responder broadly to include police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and dispatchers, or 911 dispatchers, because all of those folks experience trauma every day and deserve access to support. And then finally, this is kind of part of the back end of our public safety system, are survivors of trauma and loss. It's one of the hardest things our families go through, losing family members or children to violent crime. We put 2 laws on the books that provide for access to paid time off when our families experience one of the most unimaginable tragedies. When you lose a child to homicide or suicide, it's not going to be implemented immediately, but we are on track to provide, it's going to be unpaid, but time off to our families that experience tragedy through violent crime. And now we're going to shift to talk about pensions with our resident expert.
Hey. Just briefly background, pensions was not something that when I entered the General Assembly was like a primary goal for me. Like anything else, I wanted to get money to our public schools. Happy to say that we have been able to add $350 million a year every year towards public education and, reform the way that we spread that money around. Happy to say that we've been able to get more money for higher education. So yes, I want to spend money on those, but it became very quickly apparent to me that if we didn't address the realities of our pension debt and we continued to allow the system to get worse instead of get better, that debt service would squeeze out the ability for us to pay for the things that we want to pay for and we need to pay for. So for me, understanding our pensions and working on our pensions to try and make them incrementally better every year is something that is critically important. It's important for us as taxpayers. It's important for us as residents to be able to support the programs we want to support. And of course, and least but not last, it is critically important that we ensure that the people that have worked for us and have served so well can rely on retirement benefit without having to worry that it will be there. So to that end, I've been working on pensions for a while. We make change where we can find it. This is a really good bill. House Bill 2352 takes some first steps that other pension systems are going to have to follow over time. Good news is that 10 years ago, Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle acknowledged that there was a problem with her pension system and started making additional payments. As a result, her fund has increased over time. It's the level of its funding, and it's one of the better funded plans in the state of Illinois. What we did with House Bill 2352 was we secured that for the future going forward. It's making changes. It's making sure that the payments that are made are mathematically and actuarially correct. It's what we call an actuarial determined contribution, or an ADC. We also fixed a problem that would be coming up called safe harbor. When we instituted Tier 2 pension reform 12 years ago, the state made an error in the way that it was calculating some of the benefits. So we're fixing that here. We need to fix it with the state, but we're getting it done here, and that's great. So there are some really good things that happen here. And again, if you work for Cook County, you know that your pension fund is on its way to 100% funded. And if you live in Cook County, you realize that the good work that's been done in this fund and now with this legislation is one thing we don't have to worry about. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so that was a little bit about pensions. There's so much more work, and we'll cover a little bit more later. But let's move on to consumer protection. And about, I think it was 2015, so about 8 years ago, was when ride shares really became this thing, and they were operating in Illinois without any regulation, and we established legal regulations for rideshare companies, how they could operate. But during that process, one of the things that the rideshare companies lobbied for and were to receive was an exemption from what's called common carrier liability. It's a legal term, and what it means is that if your business model says, I invite you into my care and I will care for you while you were there and you will pay me for it, then I am legally required to give you the utmost care. And if something happens to you while you're in my care, you can seek redress from me. You can sue me in court and I can be held liable. And if you think about it, every time, I'm sure many of you don't know what common carrier is, but as I'm about to tell you, this will all make sense to you. If you step into a cab, you have common carrier liability protection. If you step onto a bus, onto a train, into a plane, onto a boat, if you check into a hotel and something happens to you, you can sue the owner of that company. When rideshare companies were exempted, as the law stands currently until the governor signs this, if you step into an Uber and something terrible happens to you, and I'm going to tell you a story here about a woman who got into a rideshare, an Uber, I believe, late at night, asked, the Uber was supposed to take her home, fell asleep in the back of the Uber and woke up in a dark place with her hands and feet zip tied and being brutally sexually assaulted. When she went to sue for that horrible thing that happened to her, the law says that she can't sue Uber, she can only sue the driver. Well, as you can imagine, probably not a sufficient recovery. And that means she's not able to be made whole for the horrible experience that she lived through. So by adjusting this, by removing this exemption and now subjecting these rideshare companies to common carrier liability, it does not make you safer in the moment when you're in the car, but it makes sure that you have the legal redress that you need to be made whole if something bad happens to you. We can move to the next slide with that. All right, so we've got some upcoming priorities here. And I guess I'll talk about the first couple here, and then we'll turn it over to Lindsey for the second two. So one of the things, as I mentioned, I was the sponsor of the bill that created the Chicago Elected School Board, but because it is done by districts, we have to draw maps. We engaged in that process in the General Assembly, and we made some progress, I think, but it is a complicated process and there are lots of interests. And I think it's really important when we do this first set of maps. I don't think that there is a right or a wrong, but you want to make sure that you're addressing the needs of these communities, that they're being paired up together so that we get good representation for this first elected school board. We weren't able to get that done in the House of Representatives in Lindsey's chamber. They passed a bill that we then passed in the Senate, which creates an extension till April. My hope is that we can get some work done over the summer and get them passed in fall, but we will get them done in time for the school board to be done properly, but more work on that. Next, continued need for pension reform. One of the things I will tell you about is that we are continuing to work on pension problems. Chicago has a big pension problem. The state continues to have a big pension problem. And will be part of a working group. We're actually two working groups, one addressing the state pension problems and one addressing the city pension problems. And we're looking for solutions on those. and hoping to institute some changes that will be beneficial. I think it's great. I will tell you that it was one of the very first acts of our new mayor, Brandon Johnson. And I'm very proud of that, after prior administrations had, we always say, can down the road for so many years. It's great to see that the new mayor is willing to really tackle this head on. So I'm looking forward to working on those two working groups. So with that, I'll turn it back to Lindsey for the last two here, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
All right. And I just want to point out that these are some priorities that we are talking about today, but both Rob and I are very ambitious and have a long list of things that we want to work on: public safety, homelessness, getting that cost of living down, ethics reforms. But, with the slide, with limited time, you're forced to focus on a few things. So with that, behavioral health financing models, I made that sound a little fancier than it actually is. Behavioral health, for those of you who don't know, it's just more of a broad term to refer to both mental health, substance use issues, and trauma support that many of us need throughout our lifespan. And what has become so clear to me in my now 6 months as chairing the Mental Health and Addiction Committee in the House and being a member of our Medicaid working group, which is a bipartisan and bicameral group that tackles Medicaid issues in the General Assembly, is we do not cover the cost of care, in particular for Medicaid. And there's about 3 million plus people on Medicaid in the state of Illinois. That's a lot. We have a population of ballpark 12.5, somewhere between 12 and 13 million. So if we can't adequately fund our Medicaid system to actually cover the cost of care, then at the end of the day, even if people have Medicaid insurance, the system is not going to be robust enough to meet people's needs. So let me give you a few examples of this. First of all, as I've already mentioned, our mental health workforce, even the workforce that's in the private sector, let's say working at a hospital that doesn't take predominantly Medicaid, for the value of that work, we do not pay people enough. And as an example, when I got my master's in social work in 2012 from UIC, I came out and I had 2 part-time jobs, one of which I was a homeless street outreach worker based out of St. John's Episcopal Church in Old Irving Park, and I made $15 an hour. That was in 2012, but really that wasn't that long ago. And I share this with you because even for our people that have graduate degrees in behavioral health, still are really not, $15 an hour, I think it speaks for itself. Not getting paid. And what does that lead to? People leave the field, people burn out, people, if you're going to work at a place like Lutheran Social Services in Portage Park, where we need you to work, people might stay for a few years instead of, longer than that. So I'm going to keep fighting to get our Medicaid reimbursement rates up. Some of us in the office visited Haymarket, which is one of our biggest substance use disorder treatment centers today. And we heard all about the challenges of state funding and the challenges of retaining staff. They should have 380 employees. They have 314. Next one here, and there's workforce issues under the umbrella of developmental disabilities too. In Illinois, we have really struggled to have a robust and strong developmental disabilities system. And this includes our kids and adults who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. It includes day services. It includes residential group homes. And I have joined a fierce group of legislators that are going to continue to fight for this issue, with the ultimate goal being that our kids and adults that have developmental disabilities have opportunities throughout the lifespan. And in particular, one of the fights I took on in partnership this year was making sure our main workforce in this field, they're called direct support professionals, get paid an adequate wage. And we were able to increase their wage by $2.50 an hour. I met a DSP, as they're called, who works in Springfield doing day services, and she made $15.50 an hour. And the young man who it was her job to support in his supported employment actually made more than her. He made 17. And they kept coming to me every day in Springfield saying, how's it going with the rate increase? Are we going to get there? So this might seem like an obscure issue if it doesn't touch your life, but I got to tell you, it's a big part of what we do in state government. And every day when I'm out and about on the far northwest side, I am constantly meeting people, our families who have loved ones with developmental disabilities who really care a ton about this issue. So we're going to continue to work on that. And we helped facilitate a partnership between Vaughn Occupational High School in Portage Park and Wright College and Eli's Cheesecake for a young adult employment program for our young adults with developmental disabilities. And we hope to grow that program. Very proud of it. All right, next slide. Rob, you want to start with the budget?
Sure, happy to. I'm happy to say that for the for the sixth successive year, the last year of Governor Rauner's tenure, we actually passed a budget. So for the sixth consecutive year, but the fifth under Governor Pritzker, we have passed a balanced budget. And that is, again, when you look back under the Rauner administration, it's no small feat. Things can go sideways really quickly. It takes a lot of people with varied interests to come together and create what is a compassionate and yet responsible budget. That means investing in the things that are important for Illinois residents, each of us fighting for our districts, trying to get things to our districts that help the people and the individual needs of the people in our districts, but still being responsible. And it was that. This is a good budget. Is it perfect? None is, but this is a pretty good one. It contributed an additional, this makes me happy, an additional $200 million to the state pension systems beyond what the statutory required payment is. This is good. Anytime you front load that debt, it's like making an additional payment on your credit card or on your mortgage. You're lowering that debt trajectory. What it does is it helps us now so that when people of Kinsey's generation are running the state and taking care of things, it makes the problem a little bit easier for them instead of making it worse for them. And that's the right thing to do. We've got some great investments that we're really proud of. $250 million the first year of Smart Start Illinois, which is a program that begins to put money into savings plans for college education for kids. It's a program that's worked really well in California. We're starting it here in Illinois. $350 million increase for K through 12 evidence-based funding. Again, this is what I talked about, that commitment that we're putting an additional $350 million more. I think Lindsey and I would both agree that that's not quite enough. Like, we should be ramping that up to more. But again, there's a lot of push and pull, and we are happy that we're continuing to increase our funding for education after so many years of decline. A $100 million increase for the monetary assistance program, grant funding. This is something that I am so personally very, very proud of, because when I lived through the Rauner years, we zeroed out funding for MAP grants as part of that budget impasse. And it was just heart-wrenching and heartbreaking that kids would come to my office, call me up and say, hey, I can't go back to college without my MAP grant. I need my MAP grant. And we would not fund them because of this budget impasse. So the idea that we went from kids being denied the opportunity to now the greatest amount of working class, middle class, and working poor kids being able to access college education by receiving a monetary system award. It's really great. That is right. That's what this it makes everything so great is when people have opportunities, and this provides that for them. I know I kind of ran through a bunch of them, but Liz, you want to take the last couple and then move on to the next slide?
It is all good. It's all good. And obviously folks can read the slides too, but the two other bullet points on here, again, this is just a snapshot of the $50 billion state budget. We made a targeted appropriation of 16 million, which will lead to 2 new cadet classes at the Illinois State Police, which of course is our state law enforcement. And the ultimate goal is to have 200 additional sworn troopers on the street. Illinois State Police is also in charge of our state forensic lab, so they play a very important role in processing our evidence in terms of crimes. And then finally, this was actually an appropriation we made back in January in what we call our lame duck session, but we are just reappropriating it because it has not been tapped into yet, but it is a very important business incentive tool. 400 million as a fund to close economic development deals. And we have businesses of all types and sizes in Illinois. This incentive fund is for our big businesses that we want to come to Illinois to create jobs and to really accelerate certain industries, like, for example, our burgeoning electric vehicle industry.
All right, and then our last slide involves capital investments for the district. So we're just going to show you the numbers here, $17 million of capital investment. And just because we are a little short on time, we are just going to ask that if you're curious about where specific amounts like the 6 million in street resurfacing is going, that you put those in the chat and we can address them specifically to what you guys are all concerned about. We are going to move on to the question and answer portion from Rob and Lindsay. let's see. All right. So our first question is, what were your main goals and priorities for this legislative session, and how successful do you feel you were in achieving them? And we can go to Lindsay first.
All right. So I'm going to talk some bigger picture and smaller picture, and shocking, I've already talked about some of this tonight. So as the incoming chair of the Mental Health and Addiction Committee, I mean, the bigger goal was increasing affordability and accessibility for mental health support for our kids and adults. In particular, I feel so strongly that at the end of the day, if we don't have humans in our mental health jobs to support other humans, people just are not going to get the support that they need and deserve. So one of my biggest goals was and continues to be what I call building up the behavioral healthcare workforce through recruitment, retention, diversity. So we won some battles in terms of Medicaid reimbursement rates. We got a 30% increase for detox and inpatient for our substance use providers around the state, and I'm very proud of that. I also led a bill with State Senator Karina Villa, who also is a former school social worker, like I'm a former social worker, to create an alternative pathway to the licensed clinical social work exam. And data came out recently showing that that exam has alarming racial disparities and age disparities in the pass fail rates. And there are many people who have been working in the field of social work with a master's degree, who did all their education, who just aren't good at standardized tests. So we passed a bill to create an alternative option where people can continue to work in the field and then after 3,000 more hours get licensed if they took the test and failed it. We're the first state to do that. That will help build the workforce immediately. And then finally, on a more local level, going back to that capital investment slide that we just saw flash across the screen, I made it my mission, and with Senator Martwick, to get some money for the hyper-local human services on the far northwest side, because I really feel like we don't have a lot, frankly. People sometimes think of the far northwest side as more economically stable, and compared to some neighborhoods that have longstanding generational poverty, we are. But, and I bet many of you know this, we also have lots of folks that struggle with homelessness in Jefferson Park and Portage Park, and to get services, they literally have to go to Uptown. So we made it our mission to put some money in the budget for Lutheran Social Services, which has a location in Portage Park, for targeted homeless outreach and support on the far northwest side. We also were able to put some money in the budget for the Senior Assistance Center that serves Norwood Park Township, Norridge, and Harwood Heights. They are a small and mighty human service organization that really needed some extra support that had never gotten freestanding state money. So those two were some top priorities for me, and I'm very proud to say they're in the budget. It'll take a little bit for that money to start flowing, but it is in there.
All right, Rob, do you have anything to add?
Sure. And again, I love this because, so much of what Lindsey and I do is the same, but then of course, because of our different backgrounds, we have our own little silos that we work on because of our expertise in those matters. And, great to see all of the good stuff that is going on with that. And again, to that end, right? Like Lindsey really helped raise awareness to me of the fact that, again, I grew up as one of those Northwest Siders here who was like, we're self-sufficient. We take care of ourselves. We do good. But we do have needs here, and we needed to attend to them. And so again, to be able to get money to social service providers, in addition to the ones that Lindsey talked about, we were able to get operating money for the Polish American Association, which is located in Six Corners area. And their name is Polish American Association, but they serve everyone. They've been around for over 100 years. And they were originally, when the big wave of migrants was from Poland, they were designed to service them, but they've been serving everyone. And this is going to help them improve their outreach and their programs. Same thing on the other end of my district, Leiden Family Services, another great human service provider in the area, but they are kind of out towards the west end of the district, but they have a very broad area. They serve anyone who walks in. And then finally, we have a wonderful human service provider in Maryville Crisis Nursery, which is over by where the Taft Extension is there. And they do really great work with medically fragile children and with families where there is, there's some crises going on in their lives and they need assistance. Maryville steps in and makes sure that children are in safe environments and doing good work. So we're able to get them additional money. So really good stuff. But beyond that, the stuff that I went into with this is kind of that same playbook that I've had since I've got here. And I'm really proud of some of the things that we were able to accomplish. The continued progress on our fiscal issues is so important to me because, as I said, I don't see it in terms of, that tunnel vision about the money, but more about ensuring that the next generation can provide for the needs of their community. We have spent a generation shorting children the resources they need in schools to be successful. I want to make sure that we're able to fix that for the next generation. And so that continued fiscal progress, the continued credit upgrades that the state of Illinois is getting means that we're on the right track. And I'm really happy with that. I would have liked to have gotten the maps done for the elected school board, but I'm happy that we are continuing to work on those things. And I know that we will get them done in time.
All right. Another thing that a lot of people have been wondering about is, were there any particular challenges or obstacles you faced while working to pass these bills? We'll start with Rob for this one.
Well, the Illinois General Assembly is an interesting place, and there are always challenges and obstacles because there are people from all walks of life. It is a very, very diverse state, and everyone has different needs. And one of the things that I've taken pride in the time that I've been in the General Assembly is working on those bills that sometimes don't get passed so easily. The elected school board took me 6.5 years to pass that bill from the time I carried it. But there are so many other bills. There are pension bills that have taken multiple years. There was a bill that helped ensure that people got the life insurance benefits that they were entitled to, took multiple years. Protecting supplemental retirement investments for public sector employees, teachers and police officers and firefighters, making sure that we were putting in guardrails in place to make sure the financial industry wasn't taking advantage of people who were saving extra money for their retirement. Took multiple years to get done. So it's a challenging place. Sometimes, it's not for instant gratification, but you work hard, keep your nose down, and if it's right, you build a movement towards getting things done. And I feel good about that. It was a difficult year, as Lindsey said, the first full year back from sort of these weird pandemic years we've had. And, and in that there's been so much change in the General Assembly. I think that there was definitely some challenges, but I wouldn't say that they were, I talk about them, but I wouldn't say that they're out of the ordinary. I would say that they are normal in the course of democracy, and that's what we deal with. And once you accept that, like I said, you put your head down, you keep pushing, and eventually you'll get what you think is right.
For sure. Lindsey, did you have any challenges that you faced during this legislative session?
Sure did. A whole lot. But one in particular that I kind of knew was coming for me as somebody who was going to be a lead in terms of access to mental health was advocating right up against the insurance industry. And the bill that I led that now allows for up to one annual, no cost, no diagnosis, mental health and wellness prevention visit a year. If it's no cost, think about it. Somebody is going to pay for that. Usually there's a cost to everything somewhere, and there's savings later, no doubt. But this bill started as a much bigger bill related to ensuring that commercial insurance networks had the same amount of access for their physical health networks, which we call, and now I've learned, med-surg, medical surgery. So the same amount of a broad network for physical health care as mental health care. And this whole bill was pared down to the one annual mental health and wellness visit a year. And about a week before the bill passed, it was actually 2 mental health and wellness visits a year. But making sure we had some version of this bill on the books that the governor would sign, that we had the 60 votes in the House for and the 30 votes in the Senate, was really important. And so it was a lesson for me in compromise. In some years, you have to take what you can get. It's still a big win. And then you go on to work with and advocate to, and sometimes against, the insurance industry next year, with the ultimate goal of more mental health access to make sure our mental health provider networks are as broad as they should be.
Absolutely. All right, our third question we have is, can you talk about a bill that we didn't mention yet that you supported but did not lead that you're really excited about? We can start with Rob for this one.
I'm sorry, it's a bill that I was supportive of but didn't pass. Is that what you said? Is it?
A bill that you didn't lead but that you're really excited about.
Oh, well, I really, I would say that the bill that I appreciated, there were so many of them. There were some, we're going through our legislation and trying to remove the gender specific language to ensure that people who are not gender conforming in a traditional sense can be sure that they have equal protection under the laws. I thought that stuff was really good. And then another bill was already talked about, that Lindsey talked about, was reining in these deceptive practices of these crisis nursery centers. One of the things that I became aware of was that, as many people know, when women go to access reproductive health care or abortion care, there are often lots of protesters. Well, one of the things that was happening was that people would show up in like orange jackets and signs like, "How can I help?" And so, of course, you're like so stressed out about this, and there's someone who ostensibly looks like they're there to help you. And instead, what they do is they say, "Oh, come right this way." And they walk you into a trailer where they're steering you away from what you intended to do, right? It's your decision to go access reproductive care, to get the medically accurate advice that you're searching for. And instead, they're steering you away to try and get you to do something that is not what your intentions do. It's just wrong. It's a bad practice. And the justification is just horrible. So what was going on at these crisis pregnancy centers, the things that they were doing, the information they were giving, the misinformation, just wrong. Whatever this person the decision makes in Illinois, we've decided that they get to make that. You should not be deceiving them out of a difficult decision. So I was really happy to support that bill.
All right, Lindsey.
This, here's one I've been thinking about that is a really big deal, but shockingly went a little bit under the radar because the governor signed it on Friday the 9th, but not in a ceremony. Sometimes the governor does ceremonies and bill signings and they're in the news, and other times he'll sign a bunch of bills at once with a minimal press release. So we passed a bill in Illinois led by Representative Kelly Cassidy and Senator Mike Simmons that was very timely, and it's related to protecting access to marriage for our LGBTQ neighbors. And what it did is it repealed Illinois statute that was on the books that basically said, if you can't come to Illinois and get married if your marriage would be illegal in another state. So why is that important at this moment in time? This was a proactive piece of legislation that we passed and the governor signed. Now, we're probably thinking now, because when Roe v. Wade was overturned just more than a year ago, there was a lot, there was anxiety across the board, not just about access to reproductive health care, but what it means for our Supreme Court to overturn something that has been on the books for more than 50 years. And think about all of the things that have changed in the world and protections of human rights that we've made the law of the land. So there's a lot of anxiety out there that the same reasoning that led to Roe v. Wade being overturned could lead to marriages being unrecognized and illegal. That could happen in other states. I can tell you it is not going to happen in Illinois. So we had to proactively pass a bill, change our laws, so if the unthinkable happens and Ohio does something that takes away access to marriage for LGBT couples, people can still get married here, and it's okay, even if they're going to go back and live in Ohio. That was really it's a really important statement for us to make.
I totally agree. We have one more question before we move on to taking some questions from the group. And Rob already touched on this a little bit, but were there any bills that didn't make it through or that you were disappointed about, or something that was left undone at the end of the session that you want to work more on as we go forward? We'll start with Lindsey for this one.
Yeah, I think this is always really important to reflect on. And I saw that Susan Zimney asked a question about the environment, so I'm going to just address the question with this answer, because I have there were a few sharp disappointments in this budget and in this legislative session. Always expected. You're never going to get everything done. But I would say, like, Illinois is a really good state for the environment and conservation. We are a nation leader, especially in the Midwest. But this spring for the environment wasn't so great. That's not to say that we haven't done big things that are in the process of implementation. We passed the nation leading Climate and Equitable Jobs Act that will put us on a path to 100% renewable energy by 2050, but we passed that in 2021. So now we're implementing. And we had several environmental related bills that were not successful. Some of them came up for a vote and didn't get enough votes, or some of them came up for a vote and if you are an environmental advocate, you didn't want the bill to pass and it did. So these are the things that are going to inform our work going forward. Let me name a few of them. And this, I'm not an environmental expert. Luckily, I represent one, Susan. We had a bill that would force companies to clean up coal ash ponds. We have several up in Lake County. That bill came up on the board last spring, didn't get the number of votes it needed. We were working on it this year. It didn't even go up for a vote because the votes weren't there. And that's what you'll see often. You don't put a bill up on the board. There's always exceptions, but in general, you're not going to see that up on the board if you don't have the votes. We made some minimal progress to ban styrofoam, which is really harmful. We got, in terms of how far we got, state agencies are on a pathway to eliminate their use of styrofoam and eliminate their contractual relationship with vendors who use styrofoam. We had a much bigger package for retailers and restaurants to eliminate styrofoam. Didn't quite get there. The bill passed the House, but not the Senate. So that's something that we are also going to continue to work on. But I would say, just to respond to the question, it wasn't the best year for the environment this spring. So the table is set to keep working in the fall and next spring.
All right, we'll turn it over to Rob.
Well, I'll be brief because I certainly agree with Lindsey, but most of the stuff I already said. The elected school board, it's so critical to me, and I think really to everybody, that gets done. So I'm looking forward to that, where there's still much work to be done. We've passed the bill that will create it, but we have a lot of details to do. So I'm not surprised that will take multiple years. And look, we owe $140 million to our pension systems. It's not going to get solved tomorrow. So we continue to work, continue to find solutions. And so I guess it's, I'm not going to say that I'm disappointed that those things didn't pass. I understand that they are projects that continue year after year after year to continue to work on them. You know, it's just the nature of what it is. And so as long as I'm lucky enough to continue to have the opportunity, I'll continue to work on those things.
All right, we are now going to open it up to questions from everybody here in the town hall. We've already seen a few coming through in the chat, so we'll start with those. But if you have more as the conversation progresses, feel free to add them in the chat and I will read them aloud. And then as a reminder, if we don't have a chance to get to your question, you can always email one of our offices at info@Rep.LaPointe or info@senatormartwick.com, or you can even stop by our office. So whichever is most convenient, but we will try and get to as many of these questions as possible. We're going to start with a question from Scott Dewey. How much did Medicaid allowable increase for practitioners? Allowable rates, I believe.
I need a tiny bit of clarification on that question. Or maybe Kinsey, you can help me interpret it.
Let's see.
Oh, there we go.
I'm not, Scott, if you want to unmute to clarify really quickly. I think from what I understood it as, like, how much did the rates that are allowable for Medicaid reimbursement increase for
Okay, I gotcha. Thank you, Scott. So we did a Medicaid package, and a big part of it was the 10% across the board Medicaid increase, rate increase to hospitals for anything they're doing related to Medicaid. And different Medicaid services, depending on what the service is, you know, there's different billing codes and different rates. And to get real nitty gritty, even like inpatient psychiatric for Medicaid, it's not even an across the board rate across the whole state. A hospital in Peoria might have a different reimbursement amount than a hospital in Chicago, which to me doesn't make the most sense, but something I want to dig into more. So to answer your question, Scott, like the money is going to hospitals to increase the rates for specific services. If you are a practitioner that serves at in a hospital that takes predominantly Medicaid, you might see an increased rate, but the actual rate increase is going to the hospital. And if we want to dig into that more, we can lean on the Illinois Health and Hospitals Association. But short answer to your questions, it goes to the hospital. It would trickle down to the practitioners at hospitals that serve predominantly Medicaid.
All right. Our next question is coming from William Wardman. How are we handling the financial challenges with the increased number of migrants? We'll let Rob start on this one.
Well, that is definitely, and it was a hot button issue in the budget negotiations, especially here in Chicago, where we're getting a large share of migrants. We wanted to make sure that there was support coming from the state. And so that was something that I know I personally fought for in the Senate budget caucus hearings, where we talked about where money should be allocated. We were making sure that Chicago was getting state funds to help support it. So it is an ongoing issue, right? So migrants, there's a lot of misinformation about the migrant issue. I had someone recently come up to me and complain about how we were letting all of these illegals or undocumented come into the country. And I had to remind that person that these migrants are here legally. And so it is, it is a responsibility for us to make sure that we are providing adequate resources to make sure that we are giving them the things that they need on the front end, so it doesn't cost us more on the back end. It is a wise fiscal investment to do the right thing. And so we are fighting for those state fundings, but obviously, as Lindsey mentioned, with the ongoing problem, we are starting to realize that we are running up against finite resources. One of the things that we need to do and continue to do is to continue to advocate with our federal partners. This is a federal issue, and if we are going to provide the care for migrants that are entering through a federally controlled program, we need to be getting more assistance from them. And so that's something that we will continue to do. And I know that our Congress is continuing for it, but obviously Washington has its own set of challenges, but that is something we are continuing to do.
Yep, and I would just underscore that this is a federal, I mean, part of it is a global issue, but it's really something that the federal government, in my opinion, needs to step up for. And the amount of money that they have provided to Illinois so far is, I think it's even fair to say, dismal. So we're going to continue to advocate for that, and people being shipped here on buses with no communication and in no coordinated fashion, I'll be a diplomat about it, is extremely unhelpful.
All right, and then we have another question from William Wardman. can you work with related to federal connections, can you work with our federal representatives to open up insulin to generics in relation to dropping the price with competition from monopolies?
Yeah, I can do my best to answer that. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but the General Assembly has a newer member who is from the near West Cook and DuPage suburbs. Her name's Representative Ladish Douglas, and she's the one that led the $35 a month cap on insulin. She has her own deep lived experience with access to insulin, which really drives her passion and advocacy. This is her lead issue. She's going to continue fighting for it. She's the leader on this in the General Assembly. I'm lucky to be able to talk to her whenever. So yes, I'm going to work through Jen in the House, Representative Ladish Douglas, but also one of our other colleagues, Representative Nabila Syed from Palatine, passed a bill this year that puts some protections against price gouging into legislation. I don't believe the governor signed that one yet. So those are two places for us to look into so we can get to yes, because there's no reason for giant corporations to be profiting off of life-saving drugs and breaking the bank for our families. That's a really good question.
Rob, did you have anything to add on that one? All right, we'll move on to our next question from Danielle Baptiste. Is there a place to find the 500 plus bills that have been passed recently? We'll open this up for either of you.
Ain't that a good question?
Yeah, the process is tricky. So all of that information does exist on the Illinois State General Assembly website, ilga.gov. And if you want to contact our office, we can probably, I could find it for you. I'm not going to try and do that right here at the moment. So if you contact our office, we can kind of point to where it shows the bills that the governor has signed and the bills that have passed, so there's a listing of bills that are sent to the governor and bills that he signed. And so that's out there. Additionally, there are because of the bills that are passed, so many of these are, not every bill that we pass is a big, controversial, newsworthy bill. Sometimes we are just fine-tuning legislation to make sure that it's effective. And so you can find some summaries. I don't know about the House, but the Senate puts together like a book every year of notable legislation that's passed. And if you're interested in that, we can try and hunt one of those down for you and get it to you. Happy to provide you, connect you with those resources.
And just another note on that, there are various stakeholders that do work in Springfield. I'll just name two to make a point. Housing Action Illinois works on housing accessibility issues across the state. And then the Community Behavioral Health Association of Illinois is one of our associations for many of our behavioral health providers. And Illinois Chamber of Commerce is another one that's doing business issues. Various stakeholders in Springfield, when we wrap up session, they then put together a list of legislation and some analysis about how that legislation affected their issues. So when you do reach out, if there are specific issue areas that you are extra interested in, we can point you to the right place. They're often public documents on websites that have been really helpful to me, frankly, present a list of legislation and an analysis. Very helpful resources.
All right. Our next question is from Melanie Lopez. Do you think it's fair to consider CPS demographics while creating districts for the school board? And do you believe that it is possible to create districts that strike a balance between Chicago representation and CPS representation and still comply with legal requirements? We'll let Rob start with this one since this has been something he's been working a lot on.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There have been a lot of calls to create maps that are centered around CPS, that reflect CPS demographics and not the demographics of the electorate. So the part of the question kind of begged the answer, is it, can you do it legally? And the answer is no, you cannot. And the reason is that public education, and I understand the desire to say, well, let's have the representation based around the kids who actually use it. But public education is a public good for everyone's benefit, even the benefit of people who don't send their children to it. So our local schools affect everyone's lives. Everyone pays taxes for them. It's why people without children still have to pay taxes to the schools. And the whole concept of this democratic system of an elected school board is that no taxation without representation. You cannot deny someone a vote or equal representation on the school board simply because they don't have some, they still have to pay for it. And it still affects their neighborhood. Schools affect public safety, economic development, they affect our home prices. So everyone, literally everyone, whether you are a senior citizen, whether you are a young single person who doesn't yet have children, whether you send your children to other schools, you have a stake in public education. And that's why the law requires that the districts be drawn to reflect the population in the city of Chicago. I think we can get very close to that, but it is not going to match up with the demographics of the Chicago Public Schools. It's going to match up with the demographics of the residents of the city of Chicago.
All right, Rep. LaPointe, did you have anything to add to that? All right, we'll move on to a question from Michael Rivera, Senator. This one's for the senator specifically. Will you vote yes on Senate Bill 2158 in the next veto session?
I guess the short answer is, if it comes to a vote, the answer is yes. So for people who don't know what 2158, it was a bill that would change some of the reporting requirements for people who have to, who are on registries after they have served their time, that they're required to register and report. This was an initiative that was designed to help deal with, to provide access to services for people who are homeless. And I remember when the bill was first brought to me, and I guess I was somewhat skeptical about it. I'm a former criminal prosecutor. I want to make sure that the public is adequately given the safeguards. The interesting thing that I found out in my inquiries about the legislation when it was proposed to me, was that law enforcement is in full support of this. They feel that the reporting requirements are not just overly burdensome and not really functionally productive to accomplish what they need to accomplish for the formerly incarcerated, but also for police. And it's sucking up their resources, preventing them from doing the real work that they need to do. And so it was a bill that had no opposition. It is one of those bills, because of the nature of it, it's somewhat sensitive from a political perspective, from a policy perspective. It seemed that it was the right thing to do. So if it does come up for a vote in veto or in the next General Assembly, or the next year of this General Assembly, rather, I would vote yes.
All right, and then our last question of the night is from Menachem Pearlstein. Will you call for and/or support the Invest in Kids bill in the veto session?
I can jump in here, and I'm going to presume and pop it in the chat to the questioner that the question is about will I support making sure the program continues. And just as a little refresher, because lots of people probably don't know about this, the Invest in Kids program is it's a state tax credit that people can have access to when they make a donation to the Invest in Kids program, which is a funding stream for private school scholarships. And it's been going on since 2017, 2018. And the original program was slated to sunset at a certain date, and we've kicked it out and kept the program alive a few times already. So it is, because it's using state tax credits and incentivizing people to donate, it's essentially using public state tax dollars to fund our private schools. And people in our neighborhoods who maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to go to private schools like St. Constance or St. Robert's get to access it. We don't know if this is going to come for a vote in October. We don't know if there's going to be a compromise coming up for a vote in September. And I'll talk about what that might look like. This is a program that even though I know it benefits kids in our neighborhood, and I want people to be able to go to private school if that's what they want, I have some really big concerns about spending public dollars on private education, especially at a moment where we are not fully funding our public K through 12 schools. So it's not something that I support going on into perpetuity. And another reason why it makes me uncomfortable, other than kind of a basic separation of church and state and not funding our public schools adequately, is we don't have the same, I value our private schools, but we don't have the same guarantees of protecting our young people and getting them the resources that they need at private schools that we have at public schools. In terms of access to special education, in terms of making sure we are providing the mandated by law supports for our kids with disabilities, and even in terms of making sure we are not discriminating against our young people or their families who are LGBTQ. There are some of our private schools in Illinois who receive some of this state funding engage in discriminatory practices, such as not letting young people who are LGBTQ attend. So I have some major concerns about that, and major concerns about greenlighting this program into perpetuity. I think we are going to see some conversations about a compromised ramp down, but just to be clear, if nothing happens, our young people who are accessing this scholarship will be able to finish their school years in 23 and 24.
All right, Rob, did you want to comment?
I think Lindsey said it well. I will say this: I voted against the program when it first came up. It was not vetted in public. There was never a bill. There was never any hearings on this. People were not able to weigh in on the veracity of it. It was stuck into, and it was the first thing that was stuck into a bailout for the Chicago Public Schools, funding for Chicago Public Schools, and the change to our funding formula, which provided more money for education. And it was the first act after we spent 2.5 years on a budget impasse, destroying people's lives, destroying education. The first thing we did when we passed the budget was we gave away money we didn't have. You can't, there is at some point where you have to say, and I hear the arguments, oh yeah, but it's not that much, it's a rounding error, it's this and that. Look, either you're true to your word or you're not. And it was, for all the reasons that Lindsey said, it is not wise. I think that the amazing thing that's kind of crazy is when we did this, we said to people, our state was literally flat broke and we had accumulated billions of dollars of new debt. And we said, hey, let's give a state tax credit, meaning we'll give up money that would be coming to us so that people invest in private schools. And we said, yeah, but don't they already get a federal tax deduction for that? And we said, yeah, but they're not going to be able to take that. We'll give them the money. And I was like, what? Why can't the federal government give them money or give them deductions for continuing to do this? We should not be utilizing state money on private and parochial and religious education when we can't fund our primary responsibility, which is this, as I said, $350 million additional this year. We all know it should be more. We're still like $5.5, $6 billion underfunded. And, it was 350 million this year. It could have been 425 million. We should be dedicating that money where it goes first. Am I opposed to this? I went to a Catholic school for high school, to Loyola Academy. I'm not opposed to a program like this, but you cannot, your priorities have to be right, and it's not the right priority. So I would not vote to extend it. And again, I'm open to any sort of compromise if that happens, but in its current form, I will not vote to extend.
All right, well, that wraps up our question and answer portion of the town hall. It is 7:30, so we do want to thank you all for coming and asking your questions. And if you have any more questions, like we said earlier, feel free to stop by our office on Milwaukee or email us at info@rep.lapointe or info@senatormartwick.com. We also want to remind people that we are available for free snow counts throughout the entire summer. And you can email us at either of the emails I just mentioned. And we also have our Super Senior event coming up on June 28th and the Dunning-Reed Natural Area Ribbon Cutting on June 24th. I think that's all. If the legislators have any final comments, feel free, but we want to thank you all again for coming, and we hope this was helpful to get a little bit of a wrap up and a better understanding of the spring legislative session.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you, everyone, for taking an interest in the work that we do in Springfield. It is impactful. It affects your life. So thank you for coming to be informed. And thank you, Representative LaPointe, for your continued advocacy for issues that are so important to our neighborhood. It's great working with you and being a partner with you. And I just want to throw a quick thank you out to our staff. Lindsey, our intern, for doing a great job moderating tonight, but also our staff who worked so hard to put this all together so that we could do this. And with that, I will say thank you and good night.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. There's many ways to get in touch with us. We're at the Portage Park Farmers Market, and we always appreciate engaging. So thanks for staying with us tonight. Deeply appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody.